Welcome to the March 8th meeting of the Issaquah Environmental Board. I'm Jamie Finch, and I'll be your chair tonight. Due to the hybrid nature of this meeting, we will have some members attending in person and some attending by computer or phone. For those attending remotely, please mute and make sure to indicate your desire to speak by raising your hand. We'll do our best to see that and we'll let you know when you're free to speak. For those in person, as we usually do, please indicate desire to speak by tipping your name card over. And then we will summarize agreement around any recommendations at the end of each topic. And if there's any dissent, please let me know. I think with that, we can take attendance. Stacey, can you help us with that?
Thank you. Tom Anderson.
Here.
Nancy Davidson. Jamie Finch.
Here.
Richie Hazara has an excused absence. Dan Hintz has an excused absence. Laura Lebeco. Laura is on and just connecting to audio. Good timing, Laura. We're just doing roll call. You want to test your mic? You should be able to unmute yourself, but let me know if you need help. We can come back to Laura. Ashwin Manoharan, Don McWilliams. Here. Ann Newcomb.
Here.
Janet Wall.
Here.
Great. And Laura, do you want to test your mic?
Sorry, I am here now. Wi-Fi problems.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Stacey. I think next we have the approval of the minutes. Now we had several different meetings that were included in that, including our minutes from the joint meeting that some of us attended. Stacey, did you want to do anything different for that portion, or should we handle that the same way?
No, I got distracted with the tech stuff, so I didn't check in with Tisha about the voting on that. I think we can do a vote and I'll just record how many approved those and I can follow up with her if that counts as approved or not.
So I think now if there's any comments or suggestions to the minutes, please let me know. Not seeing any, those minutes are approved as presented. And then with that, we can move to public comments. Stacey, do we have anyone online or signed up to speak?
We do not have any members of the public online or in the room, and we have not received any comments in writing.
Well, we can move on to our main agenda items. The first one being Title 18 process debrief and response to letter. Stacey, you have us for this one.
Great. Great. Well, we wanted to take the opportunity as a follow-up to our February 1st meeting and provide back the responses from the community planning and development team. And so this is an opportunity for the board to ask CPD staff if they have any clarification or questions regarding the responses to the environmental board letter that was submitted to council. So we wanted to first start with that. And just to remind folks that the environmental board letter was sent to both PPC and the council. Council expressed really great appreciation for the environmental board letter and did request that CPD provide responses to the environmental board so council could review those. The responses were presented to the council's planning, development, and environmental committee. I believe that meeting took place last week. So first, we will just take some time with Christian tonight to discuss any clarifications or questions or follow-up that you had to the responses CPD provided. Christian, I can pull out the response document just so we have it for reference. Is there anything you wanted to share to get started just about CPD's approach to the responses?
No, nothing really to add. You know, the comments were great and they really did help with the conversation with the PDE meeting last week. Many of them changes have been made. They've been made into the most recent draft. And And so if there's any questions or any clarifications on these, let me know, and we can discuss them now. So.
We'll bring those up in case there's any responses the board wants to reference.
Stacey, did you want to, how are you thinking about going through this? Should we just shout out if we have any comments, or are we going to move through it in order?
That was my thought, just to raise, if there were particular ones that the board wanted to discuss. If the board members haven't yet had a chance to review, I could put Christian on the spot a bit, see if he wants to talk through them, if he's comfortable doing that.
Okay, well then, if board members have any comments, please indicate your desire to speak. And maybe I will take a couple then, as people have any, they might be looking into. Christian, I was looking at these by the first page number. So 151 and 152 are the line numbers, I guess it should be.
Yes. Line numbers, right.
And basically my comment was the reading. So our comment was that we wanted to make sure that the indemnification was transferable to future property owners. My reading of the response doesn't, it sounds like the future property owners would be informed, but not necessarily indemnify the city. And I don't know if I'm maybe misreading, but I was hoping you could clarify.
Yeah. So if a new hold harmless is created, the city attorney's office would be confirming that it will run with the land. So if there's a past hold harmless that exists, we'll follow what that says. But any hold harmless moving forward will be written such that it will run with the land through any future owner. So that's a matter of getting those final sort of official city documents clarified and make sure the language is all set, and then we just carry that forward with, whether it's on a short plat, whether it's on a NGPE, or it's a hold harmless for slopes or wetlands.
Okay, so it sounds like, and I'm not totally clear on where it does that in the response, but it sounds like the concern of the board is being addressed.
Yes.
Or with this update or with the ongoing process. Cool. That's great to know. The next one I had was 194 to 197. So I think, unfortunately, Dan isn't here because I think he was the one that flagged this. I thought that this was flagged partially because there was just sort of a logical issue with the way that this part of the code worked. And I thought it had something to do with, there seemed to be some sections that weren't addressed by the language. And yeah, like I said, I wish Dan was here because he was the one that raised this. So maybe not remembering the exact comments from Dan, might just ask that CPD make sure that there's no kind of logical holes in this portion of it.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me just read through this one again. Yeah, I think that's what this comment was related to. So that might just be something to just check, because that's not really what the response from the city, from CPD, seems to address. Just want to make sure that there's not something that's being missed there.
I think the way that code section is written is a little clunky, with the intent being the lower functioning wetlands, we want to require the mechanism to improve the water quality, whereas the higher functioning wetlands, there is not that requirement. So these were added layers on the lower functioning wetlands, not to take away from the value of those higher functioning wetlands, the 8s and 9s. But we can make sure that if that needs some clarification, it wouldn't be a policy level tweak. It would be just a clarifying edit. in the code.
Okay. The next one was 212 to 213. My recollection, I think this might have been mine, originally, was this comment was in relation to just ensuring that the city was basically staffing to ensure that we could monitor, like not just ensure that we were getting the monitoring reports, but that we were proactively monitoring some of these mitigation work, which isn't really addressed by the response here. So again, I don't think this is going to be something that necessarily ends up in Title 18.
Right. It's definitely a procedural factor. So staff receives the annual reporting from the peer reviewer, and then it's the staff that has been assigned or new staff assigned to review those recommendations, providing them to the applicant. It's in their best interest to make changes so that the mitigation work is successful in the long run. And so that is an internal mechanism within the process, so that when we get to the end of the monitoring period, we have a successful project and the bond can be released and everyone can go about their way. So that is definitely an internal procedural practice within our tracking steps.
Okay, and that's something that is like cities currently staffed to be able to do. And
Correct.
as and then I think the last one that I had was 229 to 232. Let me just read trying to remember all these. Yeah, I just had a question because my recollection was that if you were paying, like if fee and lieu was going to be the way that someone had to mitigate for a given issue, I know that they were probably going to repay for a replacement ratio, and I think there was still some details on exactly how much what that would be, the cost of that. I didn't remember that there was a requirement of the city to then plant, because I think this budget would then be in control of city staff, correct? Someone's paying into the city tree account, that's then in the control of city staff to go and deploy those funds.
Correct. And that internal process is going to kind of coordinate primarily within CPD, but it will stretch into parks, and the first and foremost is replanting on site. Next is within the sub area, and so that's where that fee and lieu could be utilized, and then the environmental. I think if there's a new position in parks, and that's who we look forward to partnering with to have volunteer programs that can plant these trees, and that funding goes towards trees designated for that sub area. So we're focused on the site, the sub area, and then the city as a whole. If and focusing those city as a whole into areas that have a lower canopy and need to increase that goal to reach their goal.
Yeah, I guess, and I don't know how else the city tree account is going to be funded, but I recall that there was more uses of those funds than just tree planting. There was the potential for covering overhead and other costs.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really the heart of the question is there a requirement then of, because at that point it's kind of out of the hands of the individual if they paid into this city tree fund, but just confirming that the city then has the responsibility to use those funds to replant to that ratio. Is that
correct? So the ledger, that the intent behind this is that there's a ledger that's tracking how much canopy, and that canopy will depend on how many trees. So the example I think of is there's a site that is heavily wooded. They remove a tree. They don't have space on their site to replant it. That canopy that is lost needs to go somewhere else. And that could be a number of trees. So that fee in lieu could be 5 trees, so that at their 20-year canopy growth, they provide what was lost. And those are either on one site or they're spread around. And so the tracking of that is going to be the details that we have to work through and coordinate with parks as they have the mechanism to get those installed.
Okay. Yeah, that was really, I mean, that all conceptually makes sense. I don't remember it being as clearly stated in the code language, but as long as that's ultimately what will happen at the end of the day, that was really what I was hoping to get clarified. So appreciate it.
Yes.
Looks like Don.
Yeah, I've got one for you, Christian.
Sure.
Even with Jamie's numbering, 223 to 228, preservation of street trees when you guys are doing redevelopment projects. I don't think that you've accurately captured what the board was trying to get at. You reference 18.812 above saying it's a 1-to-1 replacement ratio, which is great, but I think what we're trying to say is we want you to try to preserve the existing trees where possible. I don't know how that language would read in the code, but I'd like you to reconsider that one.
And the way that the code has been rewritten, only those unhealthy trees or nuisance trees, so they'd have to meet the criteria for a hazard or a nuisance tree, are allowed to be removed. We're not talking about development. So it is a preservation. It's a retention-based code, to retain healthy trees that exist on private or public land. And so those that do meet those criteria, and are proposed for removal and can show that, they'll be allowed to be removed because they're meeting a factor. They're meeting either a hazard, a tree risk assessment, a hazard tree, or they're damaging property. And that goes for both public and private.
And that makes sense to me. I don't have a question with that. My question is around if you're going to rebuild a street and you have an existing set of street trees out there, rather than fall down and replant them, which is typical, I'd like to see the city try to preserve the existing street trees and work around them.
Mm-hmm.
If it's possible, if you're not changing the roadway footprint, if you're just, updoing the street.
Right.
The same.
Okay. And that's my understanding as the intent of Public Works as well, maintaining and only those that are, damaging infrastructure, utilities below grade, and there's no plausible means to mitigate, whether it's root pruning or other mechanisms to allow for them to be continued in their space.
This recently came up in the news. I don't know if you saw what's going on down in Seattle. It's got a cherry trees down there, and they're looking to build that street. Public spoke up at the last moment, put it on hold, and I'm going to cut it down and then reevaluate. Other items that the board has? Something we have to know online.
Yes, it's kind of online. And we're just going through the responses to the board letter.
Hey guys, your voices suddenly sound muted. Is it just me or is it everybody here that's online?
I can't hear or understand them either, Anne.
Oh, okay. We could before, but all of a sudden now we can't.
Okay, stay tuned. We're trying to figure it out.
We have a makeshift setup tonight. We were having some difficulty. I'm gonna take this down for right now. Um,
Could we see the speaker on the computer, at least for that?
Let me try something. Well, this is plugged into the
I
owl.
can hear you now, Stacy.
Oh, bizarre. Okay, we've got my computer plugged into the owls in the room, so we'll see. But the sound should be coming out of the owls, I think.
It should be.
Yeah,
Right,
okay.
but we can control that.
Okay. All right, sorry, I don't know if you were able to hear Nancy, but we're working through any clarification or questions that folks have for the CPD responses to the environmental board letter. This is just a chance to talk with Christian from CPD and getting clarification. And Ashwin too.
All right, well, I think then if you have no further comments, may be ready to move on. Thank you, Christian. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Christian.
Thank you, Christian.
Have a good evening.
You too. Great job.
All right. I think, well, maybe we should summarize what we sounded like. There were limited concerns raised and the ones that were, seem to have been addressed when upon further review by the city, their city staff. See, the next item that we have is capital improvement plan criteria and summit debrief.
Sorry, can I ask just
Oh.
real quick, we're gonna do letter process feedback.
Oh, okay.
Sorry,
I didn't
under
get that.
the, under Title 18, we also we had a very long meeting on February 1st and worked really hard to develop our letter to council. And a lot of you put in work ahead of that letter to really shape it for the meeting. So just want to take a couple minutes to see feedback on that process for the letter development. I anticipate we will be doing something similar over the next year or so, especially as we have the comprehensive plan coming up and other policies and plan development. So just if folks have any feedback on how that process went, both preparation for the letter and reviewing it during the meeting and live editing, would welcome that. We can take a few minutes now, or folks can send me feedback over email too.
I thought it went fairly well. I thought it was very helpful to have staff in the room to help us work through how the wording was gonna work. So if we're gonna do that in the future, I'd recommend having a staff member that's knowledgeable on it.
Yeah, I would echo that. I also think, I mean, I know it was a lot of work for staff. There was a lot of touch points, but I think there's something as important as Title 18 probably warranted. But yeah, I think having Minnie here helping us go through it and also checking off things that we didn't need to include in our letter so we could focus it on the items that really were outstanding or that the city was still kind of thinking about, I thought was really helpful. And then I think just the format of us kind of working through the document and being able to discuss as we did, I thought was helpful. So overall, I think while it took a long time, part of it was because that document was really long. So hopefully for shorter documents, the review time will be shorter, but thought it went as well as it could have. So.
I thought it was really smooth, Stacey. I was impressed by your ability to juggle everyone's feedback into a sentence. Given how late we went, it was a lot of brain power, but I think the only thing that I don't know how you would do this, but it would be nice just to have some sort of tech format, like in my office, right? We might have like a Word document online where we can all go in and leave comments just to simplify the comment process. So I don't know how you would guarantee that the security of it, if that matters, but that for me would have been easier to be able to just log in as I was able to make time throughout the week and leave comments rather than having to send you a document, just from a process standpoint.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I could talk with the clerks about that. I'm just wondering if there's any kind of records issue. But I think we could do that through either SharePoint or a Google Doc if they don't have concerns about that. That's a great suggestion.
Any other feedback for Stacy?
Well, I just have a quick question. This isn't feedback if we're almost done with it. And that is, what is the status of Title 18? Where's it at?
Great, thanks, Nancy. Yeah, it has gone through a couple reviews with the council committee of planning, development, and the environment. Christian might still be on, so he might be able to give a little more update. And then I believe it is going to a council of the whole this month, is my understanding. And I don't believe we have a final date scheduled for council approval, but it is moving through the process of council review. Christian, please correct and add on.
That's correct. Yes, and there will be a final public hearing before the whole city council at a city council meeting, likely in April. That's still to be determined, to get final input from the community with tentative meeting in May, I believe. It must be the 1st of May that'd be the first available council meeting as a follow-up discussion to that public hearing.
Thanks, Christian, for
Yep.
sticking around.
Yep.
Anything else on that topic?
Thanks,
Stacy?
yeah.
Okay. Great. So I think now we can move on to capital improvement plan criteria and summit debrief.
Great, thank you. So this agenda item is a chance for members of the board that participated in the summit to share their feedback on the capital improvement plan summit. And it's also a chance for all board members to provide any additional feedback they have on the revised criteria as well as the red, yellow, green scoring. So just as a little background, the city is undertaking development of the capital improvement plan. This is our 2-year update to the CIP. And for those that haven't participated in that process in the past, just a reminder, it is not a budget. It's really a planning document. It's intended to pull from the city's strategic plan as well as other planning documents. We have engaged the boards and commissions in developing or reviewing criteria that the projects will be vetted against. This first step took place on February 16th, where we brought 4 boards together to review the criteria and provide feedback. For the environmental board, we really focused in on the environment and climate criteria, but did provide feedback on some of the other criteria during that session. Our city deputy director provided, our deputy administrator provided the meeting summary, also provided to us updated criteria and the red, yellow, green scorecard guidance for our review. They are seeking any further feedback from the board on whether the updated criteria reflects the board's feedback and if there are any additional outstanding concerns regarding the criteria. The next step for board engagement will be to look at how the criteria is applied across the projects that are submitted. And we'll probably be hearing back from the administration to go through that process, potentially at our April meeting, but more likely at our May meeting. So first, just wanted to start with the board members that were present at the summit to provide a little bit of feedback, reflect on their experience a bit for the board members that weren't there. And then we can turn to any specific feedback that board members have on the revised criteria and the red, yellow, green thresholds. So any thoughts from Jamie, Don, Tom, Janet? Luckily, we have 4 of the 5 folks that were there. Rishi was also present at that event.
you're just looking for general feedback on the format and kind of the meeting.
Yeah, general feedback. That was kind of the first time, to my understanding, that we've really brought boards and commissions together to look at the criteria, and interested for any feedback on how you all thought that went. That evening session.
I thought it was very interesting to hear the perspective of the other boards that were there. And kind of be able to digest that into your thoughts, how you can roll their desires into ours. I think that worked pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd second that. I thought it was interesting to hear how those other boards thought. And I thought the format did provide us good opportunity to kind of go away and as an environmental board, circle up, and then come back with the perspective of all the other boards being able to do that as well. I think you ended up with fairly concise, good summary of how a pretty broad group of people thought about the issue. So yeah, I thought it was a good format.
Janet, Tom, any additional reflections? Great.
Well, I enjoyed the process. I thought it was quite engaging to hear what the perspective of these other groups, and I think it was encouraging that our voices were being heard on some of these points. So I mean, I'm just haven't spent as much time as I should have in preparation for the meeting here, I'll admit. So I'm going over it now, and I'm seeing things that I remember we brought up, and they're being spoken to here. So that I like is part of the question here. Well, is the response adequate to the issues we raised? I guess I'm not ready to make a determination on that. I think just reflecting on what I'm seeing here, well, the words aren't specific enough for me to tell how that actually will get reflected in the process. Oh, I'm unsure.
Okay. And that's where we were gonna move the conversation next, just to see if you all felt like the input you provided at that summit was heard and is reflected in the revised criteria. I know a number of board members weren't able to attend that summit, and just to see any of your reactions, concerns, questions that you have about the criteria. The deputy administrator did share that she's really wanted to bring this back to the boards to kind of close the loop and show that where possible, your input was taken and incorporated. We don't have time for a lot of multiple iterations, but they do want to open up the opportunity that if there are any concerns or feelings about the criteria language that we really want to make clear to the administration and have them reconsider, there are some opportunities to provide that feedback. If we get to that point tonight, I can share those different pathways that we could take. So did want to turn just to see kind of, for those of you that weren't at the summit, any reflections that you have on the criteria and the red, yellow, green thresholds, any concerns you want to raise? And then also for those of you that were there, do you feel like the feedback you provided there was incorporated, and are you fairly comfortable with where things sit now?
I think our comments were addressed. I don't know that everything was incorporated the way we had requested. I wouldn't expect it to be. So as long as they're looking at it, then that's good.
My biggest concern with, and this is, I mean, I think it's particularly an issue with the climate resiliency or environmental benefit, is the way that the red, yellow, green breaks down is that no impact and negative impact show up as the same thing. So I think we need to be consistent. I'm looking through and I'm not sure that it truly is consistent that, well, it should either be yellow is no impact and red is negative impact for all of these criteria, or vice, or we need to figure out, I think it gets confusing if you have no impact and negative impact showing up in the same color, which is currently the case for ours. And some of the other ones, I think maybe that's not the case. So I would just ask that they really look hard at being consistent with how those different colors are scored. Because I think the current one is problematic for our criteria in particular.
Thank you.
Any other feedback on the document?
For the benefit of Nancy and Laura and Ann, who weren't there, what James was talking about on the climate resiliency and environmental benefit, we had recommended that those get broken into two separate categories to better define them. And it doesn't look like staff went down that path. It'll be interesting to see how they weigh out when they're put against an actual project.
Yeah, that's great, Don. I didn't even bring that up. I do still think that there's a bit of a conflict there. If you're building a road project involving a bunch of concrete, that's going to improve transportation and access to not like other forms of transportation, but then you have a huge climate footprint of the actual construction of all that. I don't know how the accounting on that works, but will be interesting to see how they determine what is truly positive and how they, when something has some positives, some negatives, how it gets scored, because they haven't split those up.
Yeah, I'll provide the feedback to Andrea and Robert for them to take if they can and incorporate as staff are submitting their projects.
I mean, I think that's where yellow may be. I think they need to think hard about how they use those colors for our criteria, because there may be some ones that they need to have, like, if there's positives and negatives, what does that equal? Because that's not currently in the criteria. So I think they should be clear about where something like that would land.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, if folks have more time after the meeting in the next week or so to digest those documents and have additional thoughts, just go ahead and send those to me and I'll pass them on to the administration.
Anything else on that topic, Stacey, for us to cover?
Yeah, I'm just looking through this now, but I don't have feedback on everything, but the climate resiliency and environmental benefit can tend to be awfully narrow focused. And so it doesn't always look towards like the longer term, like stewardship. So rather than looking at an impact, because how do you measure impact? In my experience, just projects I've worked on in landscape, that's often helpful to think about, maybe not to phrase towards like, does this impact positively or negatively, but over time, does this have a beneficial, I guess like stepping back a little from the temporal. So if that makes sense, I can send you feedback, Stacey, specific for words, but also I have a hesitancy towards splitting environment out from benefit from the quality of life. Again, it's just something I've seen where people can sort of objectify their environment and look at it as something separate from their own quality of life. And I recognize this isn't where they're going. It's just sort of a concern I have. So I guess this is probably not helpful for me to think out loud, but those are just two impressions I have of things that I've seen people like trip up over. But I still, the idea overall seems really helpful. So I'll stop talking and send you an email.
No, I'm really glad you brought that up. So that's actually something that Rishi had flagged, that I think one of the things that isn't incorporated from our discussion was, consideration for the full life cycle of a project on impacting a project or impact for these criteria. And so I do think that's maybe almost like a statement of how they plan to use this around, how will they factor in, what's the time frame, how are they thinking about the scoring of this? Is it the moment in time? Is it something that they have a 30-year time horizon? I don't know, somewhere in between. But I do think that's one aspect that I don't think was really clearly addressed. I think Rishi had a really good point to bring up on that. And now Laura has as well.
Yeah, like in Indigenous work, they'll often say like, what is the benefit to me now? What is the benefit to my children? What is the benefit to my grandchildren? And it does sort of remind you that like what you're taking from and giving to, it takes you out of that one-time mindset.
Great, thank you very much.
Well said, Laura. Thank you.
All right, last call. It sounds like we're all set on this one, so I think we will move on to climate vulnerability assessment. Stacy will also.
All right, well, thank you. So it has been a long time since the board has talked about the climate vulnerability assessment. I think we came in August or September and talked about sectors. Over the last several months, our consultants have been working on a draft assessment report. The goal was to have that done by the end of the year. We've actually extended the development of that quite a bit because of all of the staff input. The document I provided to you is still in draft form. I was hoping you won't read the whole thing, but at least wanted to give you a glance of what the consultants have been working on. It's still undergoing final staff review as well as an editorial review. But I did want to walk through an update of where that report is and then also talk to this board about the next steps for engagement, which will be coming up very shortly. Just bear with me a moment while I. Okay. Bear with me a moment here. Oh, that's our next meeting. Sorry, as I mentioned before, we're kind of hooked in with a lot of cords here for my computer, so sorry, bear with me here. Okay. Great. So tonight we're just going to go through a quick overview of the findings in the report. Again, just noting it is still draft. We're working on finalization, and then wanted to focus in on the next steps of this project and talk with you all about the board's engagement going forward as we start to move into policies and strategies. This project is really working to understand how climate change is impacting our community by providing a climate vulnerability report. Also, as part of this project, we're looking at raising awareness among city staff and community members on the impacts of climate change. We're doing this through generation of the report, but also developing communication tools that really speak to members of the community. We're also looking through this project to align with other planning processes and doing that by developing strategies for preparing Issaquah for climate impacts, identifying policies and strategies and actions that can be incorporated into the comprehensive plan. And then we're also working to lay a foundation for implementing climate resiliency throughout all of the city's work through generation of both the report, and then that will come up as well as we work to integrate policies and strategies into the comprehensive plan. Over the last 9 months or so, we have been doing a lot of community and stakeholder engagement. We have been meeting with staff, held virtual community workshops. We've had an online open house and a survey that went out. We've held a couple of focus groups, most recently at the garage, the Team Cafe. We had some students that actually ran a focus group there. And then coming up, we are going to have another workshop with staff as well as with community-based organizations to get their input on the next phase of this project. And then we will be working closely with you all and then with other boards and commissions and council on policies and strategies as part of the comprehensive plan process. So this project is directly comes out of the ICAP. There was a action within the ICAP for developing a vulnerability assessment, but I also just wanted it really intended to dive deeper than the ICAP went in terms of understanding the potential impacts to the city of Issaquah. It also touches upon a number of other actions that were in the ICAP, particularly under community resiliency and well-being actions. I'd say another goal of this project that's not specifically called out in the ICAP is by thinking about climate, vulnerability and impacts to areas and members of our community. We really wanted to draw in members of the community that may not have engaged in ICAP conversations or be involved in other sustainability initiatives. So we have really been working just to not a great deal of success, but we're trying to continually improve and expand that outreach to reach to our members of our community that aren't typically engaged in these conversations. So first, we're going to look at the vulnerability assessment and just talk through some of the findings that are in that draft report. We know that, well, I'll first say the work from this report is really intended to inform future planning that the city does, as well as projects. And then, as I've already mentioned a number of times, we also are using it to inform policies and strategies as they go into our comprehensive planning process. So we know that our region will see increased temperatures. We're already seeing that, especially in the summer. We know that we have wildfire and smoke becoming more frequent and severe. We're also seeing reduced snowpacks. We're seeing more intense storms, extreme flooding, landslide hazards, and overall seeing more extreme weather conditions. Some of the impacts from these changes will be higher rates of heat-borne illness, hospitalization, even death from heat in populations that are more vulnerable, such as children, older adults, and outdoor laborers. We'll see infrastructure damage, more frequent and severe wildfires, as well as flood events.
Stacy,
Yeah.
one question or clarification.
Yeah.
Based on, I read through the whole document, which maybe I shouldn't have. One thing I was interested in was how wildfire, like the specifics on wildfire, and I know it's draft still, but I know that's something that the board has been really interested in. My reading was that the consultant was saying that wildfire was more likely generally in the area where smoke would be a big impact, but that locally there wasn't expected to be a major increase in fire risk due to wildfires. And so is that like, how far along is that? Am I interpreting that correctly? And then two, is that where we think that's going to end up?
Yeah, I think smoke is where we've mostly seen the risk. I think there's a lot of concern about wildfire coming. We just don't know yet if that is going to be the case, but because a lot of what they've been talking about in the report and based on community and staff input is even if our wildfire risk isn't really high, we have some neighborhoods that have really limited access and in and out points. And so we need to strategize to make sure that those communities or members of the community can be safe during those events. We did just get some additional information from our interim emergency manager too, that we're working to incorporate in around wildfire risk.
Did you,
Go ahead, Nancy.
sorry, it's hard to, but did you coordinate that with Eastside Fire and Rescue in terms of, what they're seeing, not only for this community, since they serve not only us, but North Bend and Snoqualmie and other areas that are also even a little further out. But, it's clear that their resources, if there is a wildfire in Eastern King County, their resources are going to be really taxed and stuff. And I think that's something that people are trying to raise is how are we going to address that?
Yeah, that's a great point. We have had members of Eastside Fire and Rescue participating in the staff discussions, but those conversations, especially around strategies, policies, so that is a good thing to highlight. I'll make sure we're reaching out to them.
And I think just one piece of feedback on this general topic, I think it would be really helpful as we have more meetings on this to be really clear about the location of where we think the wildfires are, like where the majority of that risk is going to be and the local impacts versus the general area or the state level impacts.
Yeah.
I think, like, if you were to just look at this slide, that would be really concerning.
Scary. Yeah.
More frequent intense wildfires, not knowing that most of what they were talking about was in the Cascade, like in other areas, not necessarily here. So
Right.
just think that that would be helpful to provide people. I know this is just at a very high level, but I think that's one that's a lot of people are going to be paying attention to.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think one of the challenges, the modeling only goes down to certain scales. And we've been working a lot with Climate Impacts Group to use some of their most recent modeling, but it's still at a pretty high level. And so trying to learn as much as we can from that, but also knowing if we don't know the exact magnitude of the risk for our community, we do know that if that kind of event was to happen, we have some major challenges here. And so being prepared for that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it looked like you raised your hand.
Yeah, and please, folks on the phone, because I am on one screen here, please do just jump in because it's hard for me to see some of the hand raises. So go ahead, Anne.
Yeah, so if we do continue to get these, intense heat domes of, 105 plus degrees, I think there's a good chance that sadly we will have wildfires. I know there was a fire up the power lines from where I live. It wasn't a forest fire, but it was just from a spark and it lit the grass on fire. So sadly, I think we might be dealing with forest fires even in our neighborhoods, and we're going to have to be really careful and try to make our forests as healthy and resilient as possible.
If I can jump in, if you're done, Anne, I actually did my research thesis in grad school on wildfire, and I studied in California. So we're on the front lines of studying the front lines, and we're absolutely at risk for wildfire. It's just going to happen. And an interesting thing that I studied was, I won't get into the details, but was the idea of having a fire ethic, of introducing a fire ethic. So I think it's important, this kind of work that we're doing and looking at when you introduce a fire ethic as well as an environmental ethic, you start to help like empowering the community to recognize fire risks and manage their own land and help their neighbors manage their land is super important. So I think we should just assume it's going to happen rather than saying it's a low risk. It's rather inevitable, but I'm happy to share any research I had, but I do, I have the research that I saw was interesting that, there's some communities that were especially at risk that had sort of their own makeshift fire crew to jump in so that no one was at risk. But so yeah, Jamie, I agree with you. I'm glad you brought it up.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, we will be working on a number of communication tools as part of this project. So learning more about that fire ethic, any resources you can share would be great.
Thanks, Laura. Janet, go ahead.
Yes, I think we are going to see some more increase in fire dangers because I've certainly seen in my neighborhood the effect of the drought on trees. So we're losing a lot of our western red cedars. And I have a hillside where I've lost quite a few big leaf maples. And when I've tried to find out, research why are they dying, they say climate change. So, yeah, I've lost just 3 big leaf maples in the last year.
Yeah, same here, Janet. When I first got involved with Joey Holbert from he has the Forest Health Watch. We were organizing hikes and things. I wanted to have him out to my place because I was so proud of how healthy all the cedars were, and how resilient they all were, and not a problem here. And then after the heat dome, we lost 3 on our property. Our neighbors lost a couple, and then we live up from power lines, and there's a whole bunch of dead ones, ones that the tops are brown, and usually once the tops are brown, the rest of the tree is going to die. It means the water wasn't able to get up. So we'll watch them. Maybe it won't happen, but most likely, even in my neighborhood on the northeast side of the hill, which is shadier, the cedars are dying.
Sam, Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect a little. My family likes to vacation in Bend, Oregon area, in a little resort town that's amongst the trees, and the fire risk there is very well recognized, and fires in that area are fairly regular. The community has never been threatened by fire real close yet, but it's expected someday that will happen. The community has engaged in a ladder fuel reduction program now for 30 years. And it's been impressive to watch because I've been going there for over 20 years and seeing the progress made in the forest surrounding the community is going from a jumbled mess of stuff, dead wood laying around on the ground, and now it's much more clean, more like it would have been in the olden days when fire was allowed. So we're kind of really restoring the forest to what it was before fire suppression became the thing. So maybe it's time for the city of Issaquah to engage in programs like that. It's not a quick fix at all. I mean, like I mentioned, this community's been working at it for 30 years. And it's an ongoing battle, and the bar is raised a little bit each year, but it's a lot about just maintaining the progress you've already made and then pushing a little bit further. It's kind of been the agenda, and that's how they've approached it. Also, in terms of community outreach and education, making sure everybody gets the message over and over in various community publications or wherever they can present on defensible space and what you should be doing around your house to make sure that it might survive and also not be a part of the chain of propagation of fire. It's not just about your house, it's about, well, what happens when your house goes ablaze and then, it changes to the next house, etc. So community education, public education about the risks would be, I think, valuable for the city of Issaquah to engage in, and also to think about ladder fuel reduction on the periphery at least, and then kind of work out. But a human-caused fire somewhere in our footprint, the city of Issaquah footprint, then spreading up the slopes of Squawk Mountain and affecting trapping and affecting the residents who live halfway up the mountain. That's definitely a possibility in my mind on Squawk particularly. Tiger, there's fewer people who live high, but Squawk, the community goes up halfway to the top, and they are at risk, I think. That's all.
Yeah, thank you. You all are already starting to generate lots of ideas and strategies, and we'll be having a lot more conversations about those, so. Great. So I'll just move through a few more slides. I feel like you all are ready to move to that next step of strategies and policies, which will come in a month or two. But just to highlight a few other findings of the report. So we highlighted just some of the community members that are high at risk. This was based on research from the consultants, input from staff, input from the community. And then moved into the actual vulnerability assessment. So to assess vulnerability, they were looking at three things: how much the community is exposed or in harm's way to climate impacts, the degree to which we are anticipated to be affected by those impacts, and then some indication of adaptive capacity or the actions and conditions that help a community prepare for climate impacts, which would decrease our vulnerability. You all saw this slide back last summer, but this just kind of breaks down the steps of compiling the vulnerability assessment. They characterized anticipated climate impacts to the community, looked at current science, knowledge of existing conditions, understanding of community perspectives, They looked at the sectors that they wanted to identify climate vulnerabilities for, which you all provided some feedback last time we met on this topic. Once they had those sectors identified, they gathered as much information they could about existing and proposed plans and projects, work at the city, knowledge from community and staff experts, reports and research, so that they could then assess the exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity of those various sectors. They assigned a scale to the gathered information, looking at typically high, medium, low, so that they could identify what places, sectors, or community members might have a higher level of vulnerability that we could then address with resilient strategies in our next phase of the project. So I'll just go through some of those initial results that were in the report. And then, as mentioned, we'll be coming back in the future months to talk about both communication strategies and policies. So this is just a snapshot of the sectors that were identified and then where they are mostly like at risk for various climate impacts. So just as a reminder, our sectors, and these were revised based on board input, but we had the built environment and then we had subsectors under there around building, housing, and transportation. We had our natural systems. This included open space, parks, urban tree canopy, sensitive or critical ecosystems. We had water resources and stormwater. This looked at water supply, waterway health, flood zones, low-lying areas, stormwater infrastructure. And then community and economic well-being and public health and safety. We're actually looking at possibly combining or kind of reorganizing these. We got a lot of feedback from our human services team about overlap. But these will cover subsectors such as social services, businesses, regional growth, economic growth, air quality, physical health, mental health, emergency services. So here are, again, draft, but initial findings. Go ahead, please jump in.
Hi, it's Nancy. Sorry to bug you. Can you go back to your last slide? I'm sorry, I couldn't get my thing. So where are you covering things like supply chain, similar to what we saw in COVID? Because if there's a major fire on 90, it's going to impact our ability to get materials, food, particularly into the area.
Yes, thank you. That I kind of jumbled the words on that. That's under community and economic well-being, which covers local and regional economy and growth, which looks at those food systems and transportation of food and supplies as well. Yeah, great question. Yeah. So this is a snapshot of what they are finding based on the research, staff input, community input. Our higher levels of vulnerability are around those subsectors of sensitive ecosystems and physical and mental health. Moderate vulnerabilities, buildings, housing, energy, transportation, stormwater infrastructure, sewer, septic, social services, emergency services, local, regional economy and growth, and then lower levels of vulnerability, green space, tree canopy, water supply, food supply, and security. The next several slides walk through a little bit more of an explanation of the impacts and then break out those vulnerabilities by subsector. I don't need to take the time to go through it. Folks can look through the presentation, look at the report. And then we're also working on some 2-pagers that will be sharing in different ways with the community that will also summarize this information in a way that's very outward facing and friendly for the community to review. But did want to just look through these so folks could have a little bit more understanding or see some more detail than what was shown on the previous slide. But so we have our natural systems, stormwater. We could see the various subsectors within that kind of ranked differently in terms of their vulnerability. As mentioned before, that sensitive ecosystems was ranked as one of the highest, where urban green space tree canopy was ranked lower. Water resources and sewer, low to moderate here, depending on the various systems. Water supply, I think, really ranked low because of the range of different water sources that we have in the city, where sewer and septic a little bit more susceptible to different major weather events. Public health, also kind of a range here. We saw on that earlier scale, physical, mental health, we're ranking kind of highest in terms of vulnerability. I think a lot of cases, and if you dig into the report, while we may have a number of services available for community members for physical and mental health during a time of a major climate event or weather event, those services may not be able to provide their services to community members that need them. So that was one of the reasons I think that this subsector scored higher on vulnerability. And then community economic well-being, as mentioned, that gets into supply chain, regional growth, social services. So again, this was just a very quick snapshot. Just wanted to provide you all with kind of an update on where we are, let you get a sense of what the draft report looks like and the information that it's providing. The one question that I did have for the board tonight, and this is not a very well-framed question, but we do want to come to you all with policies and strategies that would be incorporated into the comprehensive plan. That's going to be the next major step where you all will provide feedback and recommendations. And wanted input from you all on whether we should have conversations about strategies and actions related to climate vulnerability as their own discussion, or if you all want to have that as part of our comprehensive plan discussion. Any input on the climate vulnerability policy and actions would be incorporated into the comprehensive plan. But I wasn't sure if it's something you all would want to see kind of a separate focused discussion on, or just have it embedded as part of the comprehensive plan discussion. That's something we can also think about, especially as Stephen's going to be coming to us in the next few meetings to start talking about the comprehensive plan. So you all can get a sense of the level of work that's going to be and the amount of feedback the board's going to be providing on that, and decide how much we want to just embed the climate vulnerability policies and strategies as part of that discussion versus just having them as their own unique discussion. So not very well framed question. Hopefully that somewhat makes sense, but any initial input or something we can think about and talk about as we get into the comprehensive plan discussions.
Stacey, you know the target date for when, I know they're starting the process now. When will a new comprehensive plan ultimately be? Are they targeting?
Believe it is towards the end of the year.
This year.
It is a fast process. Yes, and Stephen actually has sent me a draft vision for the board to start providing some input on, but he'll be coming to us, I believe in April, May, and then again in August, September to have conversations about the sections we're reviewing. And he'll be giving us an overview of the comprehensive plan and timeline and all that. But we'll move quickly.
And then another timeline question, when do we expect to have the finalized version of this climate assessment?
We are, it's undergoing editorial review, and I have a couple staff that need to get some final eyes on it. So probably within the next month. And at the same time, the consultants are drafting up strategies and policies for review and consideration. Those will be going to staff. We'll have a staff workshop on those in April, and then we'll plan to bring it to the board right after that.
Because that was the part that I was curious about, is that complete? So that'll be sometime like April,
For
May.
April, yeah, or sorry, for the policies and strategies.
The policies and
Yes.
strategies.
Yeah, at least the initial look would be, yeah, April, May. Well, we can think on that question, maybe when Stephen comes to talk to us about the comprehensive plan, so folks have a better idea of what that's gonna look like in our role, then we could talk about how much do we just integrate the conversation versus kind of having a separate climate vulnerability bucket. I'm not sure what's the best approach, so I just wanted some feedback from the board.
I have
Yeah,
a
well-
quick question.
Oh, go ahead.
Stacy, sorry. Quick question. Are they planning on doing a wholehearted redo of the comp plan, or is this just a minor update?
This is the major update that's due for 2024. There's a new, I don't want to misspeak because Stephen lives and breathes this every day, but my understanding is we will have a new section on the environment. We will be working to still integrate climate sustainability throughout, but there will be a new section, and they're going to be going through and doing a cleanup across the comp plan. But they do updates to the comp plan every year. So in terms of brand new content for it beyond the climate vulnerability assessment, there may not be any major new pieces of information, but they are doing a pretty big cleanup of it, is my understanding.
One quick reaction. I mean, I do think we're gonna have a lot to talk about on just this topic to get it to the point that, I mean, we've talked about a lot. I would guess a lot of the other topics that are gonna be in the comprehensive plan. So I do wonder if it's gonna be difficult to try to combine
Okay.
that as part of an overall discussion versus having a separate conversation once this document is complete and with all the strategies and actions or policies. So.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see as we get further into the comp. And
Okay.
I also
Great.
want to say great job with all of it. I read through it too, and you did a lot of really good work.
Oh, it has been 99% the consultants and then staff from other departments. Thank you. I will pass that along. The other major component of this project, are communication tools. So the consultants are working to develop concepts of our communication tools. They may not actually have time and budget to develop them, but we'll be looking at things that might best resonate with various members of the community. And that's something we'll also be looking to get some input on. We might have a booth at the sustainability fair to get some input on kind of prototypes or ideas. But really want to generate some tools that will speak to those communities most at risk in this law. Great.
Can I throw in one piece of feedback? I know you don't want comments, but I feel like it's something that they might want to address sooner, is that there didn't seem like there was a lot about climate migration, which I feel like is going to be an issue in the same way, like to what Nancy said, that COVID, things we experienced in COVID. So there'll be more climate refugees, there'll be more climate supply chain issues. So just remembering to think, like, we don't live in a bubble, we get our food from outside the bubble. So all these impacts are sort of internally focused. So it'd be nice to find ways to weave in some of those threads, and probably sooner rather than later. Like, we're gonna, homelessness and some complicated issues that maybe we don't plan for as our formal community.
No, that's a great point. I think you raised probably a gap in there wherever we can incorporate that into some of the existing subsectors. I think that's a great addition. All right, we'll expect more conversations coming in the next few months around communication and policies and strategies. And if you do have time to read the report and see anything that might be missing or any corrections you'd want to see made, just go ahead and send those to me.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, well, I think with that, we finish up our main agenda items and move into reports, with the first being the sustainable purchasing policy.
I'm going to hand it over to David for the first two reports.
Yeah, so I have the first two reports, and I will note both of them are at a pretty early stage. So starting off with the sustainable purchasing policy, we will be coming to the environmental board for input on this. Probably we're intending to do that twice over the next year. Right now, the idea with this is to develop some sort of policy that is not going to be a standalone policy, most likely, but rather integrated into existing financial management policies. But this policy will support the city and city staff in making more sustainable purchasing decisions that are based on social, environmental, and economic criteria and guidelines. And the whole idea around this is that the purchasing of the city will have impacts on people and on the environment. And so anything that we can do to set up our policies so that we harness our purchasing at the city level for good is something that we want to pursue. So where we are in this right now is we're in a very early stage of outreach and information gathering around the sustainable purchasing policy. No draft of the policy has been written or anything yet. And right now we're reaching out to peer cities that have sustainable purchasing policies, which for the most part are larger cities. There are some smaller cities that have environmentally preferable purchasing or sustainable purchasing policies on the books, but for the most part, it is these larger jurisdictions. So we're gathering input from them. We are working with city staff across all departments to get their input into what this policy can look like and making sure that we are right sizing the policy for this city. And then we will be coming to you on the environmental board, as well as a few other boards, including the equity board. And I'm blanking on the other one, but transportation board. I think it was transportation board as well, to try and help fine tune what this policy is going to look like. Then we will draft the policy over the summer. And that again might be in multiple pieces. It might be all at once. That is still kind of being figured out with our finance team and department about, and then the rest of the city departments around really how this is going to be drafted and adopted in the most effective way. So then once it's drafted, we'll come back to the different boards and city staff to fine tune that as well. And then hopefully really get it integrated and become a part of the financial management policy so that we can continue to make the right choices with our city purchasing. Yes.
Question for you. Do we, and I know you're still early in the process, but do we have kind of maybe role models, the wrong word, but do we know who are the ones pushing the envelope? And do we have a sense for where we want to be on the spectrum of pushing the envelope versus having a policy, but basically continuing the status quo? Like, do we have a sense for that? Because I think that's where, I mean, I will want us to engage as we get further along. So just curious if we have had any of those conversations yet.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think in terms of role models, there are quite a few role models, and I think one of the biggest ones is King County. They have a very robust program. They have quite a few resources for staff. I think our goal, and this is something that we want y'all's input on in this process, as well as city staff, I think our goal is to be as ambitious as we can, recognizing the limitations that we have within our city around, for instance, limited purchasing staff who can help oversee and manage a program. I think one of the things that we've learned pretty early from peer jurisdiction outreach and then from reviewing, the policies across the region and country is that a lot of these are based more along guidance versus hard and fast rules around what can and cannot be purchased. And part of that really is based on the difficulty of monitoring, and then more specifically, the challenge of changing technology and materials and goods. So recognizing that by the time we implement something that might require some purchasing, it might not be the best and most environmentally or socially or equitable guidelines to follow that purchasing requirement. So really trying to think around how can we set these guidelines in place to help staff really push the envelope about what we're doing with purchasing without necessarily putting in requirements that will need to get updated on a very regular basis as things change.
No, it's helpful.
Any other questions or reactions? We do intend to come back with more details on this later this spring.
Looking forward to it. This will be a fun one.
It will be. I'm excited about it. The next item is a municipal clean buildings resolution that we are also working on. And this will again also come back before the environmental board later this spring. And this resolution will work with other programs we have, such as the Clean Buildings Program, and is intended to support the decarbonization of municipal operations, and will direct city staff to conduct an analysis of feasibility of retrofitting existing municipal buildings to become all electric by 2030. And so like the Clean Buildings Incentive Program, which is looking at benchmarking and energy efficiency, this resolution will go a step further and help the city look at our existing buildings and consider how and whether it is feasible to really electrify the city buildings. At the conclusion of this, we do also hope to kind of leverage the findings of that study to make further recommendations on implementation actions based on what comes out of the study. Any initial thoughts or feedback on that one as well?
I just have a quick question for you. Are you doing the study or are you doing that externally with a consultant?
I believe that will be a consultant.
The resolution that we would hope to get a board recommendation on would advise or direct the city to complete this study. And by the end of that, we would then have the pathway and hopefully the financial assessment of what it would cost them to move through those actions. But we would be hiring a consultant to support that work.
Yeah.
So, and I know you probably said this is just for city buildings.
Yes, this is, for right now, this is intended specifically for city buildings.
Okay, thanks. And does the city have any thoughts about, are there any extra buildings that they could let go before they have to spend a lot of money retrofitting?
That is a good question. I think I don't have any specific answer to that right now, although I do know we did just hire a facilities manager. Her actual title is administrative department manager.
Administrative services, yeah.
Yes. But we are planning on doing a facilities assessment this year. And so I believe thinking around what buildings or we let go would come out of that assessment.
Awesome, thank you. Just a thought, then you could use the money from the sale of whatever those buildings were to do all the retrofitting, and
Yeah, great.
might not even need a study.
And the last thing I would note on this, similar to sustainable purchasing, where we have a model program, this is other cities regionally have adopted resolutions that we are basing the one that we are writing on, such as Tacoma and.
It's clearly the path forward. So I'm just curious as to, so when you hire consultants to figure out, do a study around this, is that, how expensive is that to hire the consultants?
We had, but so we'll be coming to the board to provide a recommendation on whether to bring this resolution forward to be approved. But we did budget for the study. We budgeted around 60,000 in this, I believe in this year's budget, should this resolution be approved. We have some initial studies done of our facilities from some in 2017, some in 2019 that we'll be building on.
And so then the study would show you what you'd need to do specifically to each building.
Yes, that is, I think, what the resolution would call for. And then I think we would also want some kind of financial pathway or recommendations on how we might fund that work.
Okay, so that isn't scope, but then the funding.
No,
is
we
it
haven't
scope for
funded.
this? No, I know.
Yeah,
It's not.
yeah.
No, I'm asking is, as part of the feasibility assessment, proposing funding mechanisms, is that expected to be in scope or out of scope for this project as it's
So-
currently?
As it is currently written, that is not within the resolution itself. I think the idea is to take the study that comes out of the resolution and then think about what the path forward would be.
Yeah, the resolution direct the city to undertake this study. So we haven't developed a scope of work.
No, I know, but let's just, I'm saying, assuming that
Yes.
we move forward with the study, that's what I was asking, whether within the study that would be in scope. It sounds like no. Is that,
Oh, if there would be financing mechanisms as part of the scope. of
yeah, like
that study.
proposed, like a recommendation to the city on how, not only, this is the situation, this is the dollar figures for these buildings, whatever, however, that part of it, and then this is how we would propose funding it. Is it just that first part, or is it the first part?
Yeah, David and I haven't talked that much about this, but I'm hoping I would want it to also be that second part, if we can fit that within the budget, because we will be coming upon a new budget this budget, or this study goes through 2023, beginning of 24, we'll be coming into a new budget season. So would want to know what are some of the recommendations. There's a lot of funding through the state and then obviously all the grant programs. So that would be something I'd be interested in including within that scope of work. We haven't talked about that much yet, but we can have some more conversations about that. When David brings the resolution for feedback, we could also have some conversations about what you all would want to see in that scope of work, assuming council approves this. That isn't something we had talked about doing, but I think that'd be a great conversation to have with you all.
And there's nothing in the current resolution that would exclude that, so.
Wouldn't this have to go through the same capital program? I mean, any of these improvements are going to be capitalized. They're going to be considered capital improvements. And thus will be subject to the criteria that we talked about earlier if that gets approved by council. So no matter how we talk about it, it's going to compete in the same way those are. Am I accurate on that?
Yeah, that might be one avenue that it goes through the CIP, and David and I are having conversations with facilities about putting in some general kind of placeholders within the CIP. This may be some of the recommendations that come out of the study might be things that facilities already was planning to do because they need to do some replacements or upgrades. So I think the different avenues for funding and how the work is implemented might vary depending on the findings.
Cool. And then I'm just going to say my 2 cents. I like the idea. So there's a lot of blueprints out there and we know the path forward. So I would like to say wherever we can save money on hiring people to create plans that are already there, and using that money to actually retrofit or buy a heat pump, something substantial, something that is going to really move us forward. I'd like to support that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Will be a good discussion.
Okay. Well, thank you, and we'll come back to you on both of those items later this spring.
Thank you. Next, we have Earth Month activities.
Yeah, thanks. I included just a memo in the packet, for updating folks on things happening in April. As we did last year, we'll be updating, we have an Earth Month webpage, that will be updated with all partner activities happening around the city, as well as just information about Earth Month. We should have that updated next week. And then also there's a brief update on the sustainability fair planning within that memo. Things are coming together pretty well. We think we have a really great list of vendors, and are just starting to work on widespread marketing and volunteer recruitment for that event. So hope that you all will make it April 16th. I will remind you multiple times, please spread the word widely.
Great. I think with that, we're through our reports and move on to other business announcements. One is the updated environmental board schedule.
Great. Yep, I can go through that, and then I have a couple other just updates. So I apologize. We have a number of special meetings coming up this spring. We just ended up with a really heavy schedule and a couple of special topics. I really am going to do my best to avoid special meetings throughout the year because we all are putting in a lot of time this spring. So coming up next week, March 16th, we will be joined by King County and the Park Board. We'll be hearing about King County flood programs, and then I'm also seeing if Jeff Watling, Parks Director, can just give us that overview of parks programs and the things happening this year, because we missed being able to have that conversation back in January. So that will be a joint meeting with Park, and hopefully also provide you with your park update. April 3rd is our next special meeting. This is to discuss the King County's Read Plus program that they presented to us back in September, I believe, September or October. This is to discuss a pledge that they are asking jurisdictions to sign. As part of that conversation, we're going to be talking more generally about the city and Recology's efforts on waste reduction. Recology will be there to talk about some of their programs, and we'll talk about some of the other items underway with the city. So those are our two upcoming special meetings, and then we will also have our regular meeting in April. Few other updates I had. A reminder that the city is looking for nominations for the environmental awards. This is for the Ruth and Dan Keys Award, and then also for the Community Environmental Award. Those are due March 13th. Next update is board applications were due. We'll start reviewing those and interviewing for new board members soon. I believe we have three positions that are up. One is a youth position, and then one regular and one alternate, I believe, without looking at my cheat sheet right now. So we will expect to have a few new board members joining us in May. Also in May, we'll be doing the chair and vice chair election. So if you are interested in that, please let me know. I have not yet had conversations with Jamie and Dawn about their interest in continuing. But if anyone else is interested in those positions, please let me know. And then just one follow-up item to our February 1st meeting. I believe Connie during public comment mentioned the public engagement toolkit, and there was some interest from board members in hearing more about this. I did reach out to the communications team, and they shared that the equity board reviewed that toolkit specifically to get input from the equity lens. And they were not planning to talk to other boards before finalizing the toolkit. However, they are available and interested in coming and just talking generally about the board, about the toolkit and our public engagement strategy, if that is something that the board is interested in. So just wanted to circle back on that item and that request. So please let me know if you do want me to follow up with communications and schedule some time for them to talk about public engagement. That is all I have.
I think it would be interesting to hear the public engagement.
Okay.
I don't know where you can fit it in, but
This summer, I think we'll have time after this break.
Any other business or announcements from the rest of the board? All right, well, I think we are adjourned then. Thanks, everyone.
thank you.
Thank you all. See
Thank
next
you all.
week.
Good night.
Night, everybody. Thanks.